My daughter-in-law didn't take me on the cruise, telling me flat out, "There's no money, you stay home." I smiled and replied, "All right." But by the time they boarded, I was already drinking coffee on the deck. My son screamed, "Are you stalking us? Get out of here, you crazy woman!" But then the captain approached and said something that made them turn pale and drop to their knees. Friends, before we begin this story, I ask a small favor. Subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and tell us in the comments which city you're listening from. Your support helps stories like this ring out louder. Enjoy the listen. The kitchen smelled of smothered onions and bell peppers. It was a familiar, soothing scent, one that always reminded me of times when life was simpler and the table was fuller. I flipped the patties in the skillet, trying not to dwell on the fact that I'd likely be eating this dinner alone again. My world had shrunk to the size of the carriage house, a small guest cottage detached from the massive estate I had built decades ago. 10 years back, after my husband passed, I signed everything over to Tavorius. "You're a man. You're the head of the family now," I told my son then. I wanted him to feel the responsibility, to broaden his shoulders, but instead of eagle's wings, he only grew an appetite for his wife Kenyatta's demands. Now I lived back here, trying to be invisible, like an old piece of furniture that's too sentimental to throw out, but doesn't fit the decor anymore. The door creaked. A gust of chilly autumn air rushed into the warmth of the kitchen, followed by Tavorius and Kenyatta. They looked tense. Tavorius wouldn't meet my eyes, fiddling with the button on his blazer, while Kenyatta, on the other hand, carried herself with exaggerated tragedy. She tossed her trench coat onto a chair without even a hello, and sighed heavily, as if she were carrying the weight of all the ancestors on her back. "Mama, we need to talk," Tavorius began, but his voice trembled. He looked at his wife, searching for backup. Kenyatta immediately seized the initiative. "Mother Ophelia, we have a crisis." Her voice dripped with honey, carrying that fake note of concern that always made my jaw tight. "Remember we talked about the roof? That leak in the east wing?" I nodded. Of course I remembered. A week ago, I had withdrawn $15,000 from my savings account, almost everything I had left from my burial fund, and gave it to them. They said the repairs were urgent. Otherwise, the house, my house, would start to rot. "Well," Kenyatta paused, dramatically pressing a palm to her chest, "the estimate went up. The contractors opened up the ceiling, and there's black mold. The beams are rotted through. Basically, every cent is gone, and we even had to dip into our own pockets." I remained silent, waiting for the blow. I felt it coming, the way you feel a storm in your joints long before the first thunderclap. "And where is this leading?" I asked quietly, lowering the heat under the skillet. "We can't take you on the cruise," Kenyatta blurted out. For a split second, triumph flashed in her eyes before she masked it with regret. "The money just isn't there, Ophelia, you understand? Ticket prices surged, and now with this repair, Tavorius and I barely scraped enough together for ourselves just to catch our breath. Our nerves are shot." Tavorius finally looked up at me. Guilt swam in his eyes, mixed with fear of his wife. "I'm sorry, Mama," he mumbled. "It's better for you to stay here. You can keep an eye on the workers, watch the garden, and we'll bring you back a souvenir." "Yes, guard the house," Kenyatta chimed in. Her lips curled into a pouty, aggrieved grimace. "Someone has to maintain order while we pinch pennies on this trip." I looked at her and felt a strange emptiness. There was no resentment, no anger, just a cold clarity. My gaze slid to her wrist. Kenyatta adjusted her hair, and the sleeve of her deep mahogany blouse slid down. On her wrist, a bracelet sparkled, a thin strand of white gold paved with diamonds, a tennis bracelet. I knew that design. I knew the jeweler. I knew the price. That wasn't costume jewelry. That was a piece costing at least 3 times the repairs she had just been singing the blues about. She noticed my stare and quickly yanked her sleeve down, but it was too late. "All right," I said. My voice was steady. Even to me, it sounded unexpectedly calm. "If there's no money, there's no money. You two go. Rest. I'll watch the house." They exchanged glances. They expected tears, guilt trips, begging. My composure threw them off, but relief outweighed their suspicion. "That's settled then." Kenyatta jumped up, instantly forgetting the tragedy act. "We need to rush and pack. We leave early tomorrow morning. Don't offer us the food. We're fasting before the trip." They left, leaving me in the silence of the cooling kitchen. I spent the evening doing my usual chores, washed the dishes, wiped the table. The darkness outside thickened, turning the garden into a black and white photograph. Closer to midnight, I gathered the trash to take it out to the bins by the main gate. It was crisp outside. The wind tumbled dry leaves down the driveway. I approached the large dumpster used by the residents of the main house, my son and his wife. The lid was propped open. Tavorius must have thrown something out in a hurry before bed. The wind caught a crumpled ball of paper falling from the bin and rolled it to my feet. I bent down and picked it up. It was heavy paper, crushed into a careless sphere. I wanted to just toss it back, but something, maybe the quality of the paper, too thick for a grocery store receipt, made me pause. I smoothed out the sheet. The street lamp overhead was dim, but the letters and numbers were distinct. It was an invoice from Apex Voyages. Date, yesterday. Payer, Tavorius St. James. Memo, reservation, Grand Owner's Suite on the riverboat, the Gilded Magnolia. Total, $15,000. The world around me froze. The sounds of the night, the rustling leaves, a distant dog barking, vanished. Only the numbers on the paper remained. 15,000, exactly the amount I had given them 3 days ago. My money. They weren't fixing the roof. There was no mold. They simply took my money to buy themselves a luxury vacation and told me to my face that I was dead weight, a burden to be left guarding the house while they drank champagne on my life savings. My chest didn't tighten. My heart didn't skip a beat. On the contrary, it began to beat steadily, powerfully, rhythmically, like a massive ship's diesel engine gaining momentum. The tears that might have appeared for an ordinary grandmother evaporated, burned away by the icy flame of realization. Kenyatta thought she had defeated a weak old woman. Tavorius thought Mama would endure and forgive everything. They forgot who I was before I put on an apron and started baking cornbread. They forgot that the name St. James used to be spoken with reverence in the trucking and logistics world. I neatly folded the invoice and placed it in the pocket of my cardigan. Then I returned to the carriage house, locked the door, and went into the bedroom. From the bottom drawer of my dresser, beneath a stack of old linen tablecloths, I pulled out a vintage leather agenda. It smelled of aged leather and expensive paper. I opened it to the first page. There was only one number written there, a number I hadn't dialed in 12 years, a direct line, a personal channel. I picked up the phone. It rang for a long time, but I knew someone would answer. Even in the middle of the night, for me, he would answer. "Speaking," a raspy, surprised male voice answered. "Who is this on this line?" "Hello, Cyprian," I said. My voice was hard as steel. "This is Ophelia. I need to exercise my executive override, and I need a stateroom on the Gilded Magnolia, right now." "Ophelia?" Silence hung on the line, heavy and tangible. "Yes, it's me. Don't ask why I'm calling. Just listen. I need the current ownership structure of the Riverflow Holdings Group, immediately." A minute later, I learned something that made me smile genuinely, for the first time in 2 days, in the darkness of my bedroom. The cruise line that owned the Gilded Magnolia wasn't just a partner. It was a subsidiary we had acquired 15 years ago, back when I stood at the helm, and according to the documents Cyprian pulled from the archives, my silent partner shares extended to it as well. Legally, I wasn't just asking for a favor. I was preparing to step onto the deck of my own ship. The next 48 hours passed in a mode I had almost forgotten, but which my body remembered instantly. Cold, emotionless efficiency. While Tavorius and Kenyatta ran around the house arguing over which suitcases to take, I waged war over the phone, locked in the bathroom with the water running for cover. My attorney, an old friend named Solomon with a voice as creaky as an unoiled wagon wheel, initially tried to talk me out of drastic moves. But when I explained the situation, he just chuckled. Ophelia, you always knew how to play the long game. Have it your way. I'll prepare the papers transferring operational control for the duration of the voyage. Captain Thaddeus will be notified. Thaddeus? Emmerich Thaddeus. I remembered him as a young first mate, honest, straight as a rail. That worked in my favor. Between calls, I packed. I unlocked the cedar closet in the back, the key to which hung around my neck with my crucifix. There, in garment bags of thick canvas, hung my past life. Clothes Kenyatta had never seen, or she would have sold or stolen them long ago. I pulled out a cream-colored linen pantsuit, Italian fabric, impeccable cut. To go with it, a silk scarf with an abstract pattern in terracotta and gold tones. No housecoats, no worn-down slippers. If I was going to war, I was going in dress blues. On the morning of their departure, chaos reigned in the main house. Kenyatta was screaming at Tavorius about a forgotten makeup bag. Tavorius was running around bug-eyed, trying to shove yet another duffel into the trunk of the SUV. I stepped out onto the porch in my usual gray raincoat, hiding my new attire underneath. In my hands, I held an old battered travel bag, a decoy. "Tavorius!" I called out. He flinched, nearly dropping a toiletry kit. "Mama, what now? We're running late!" he barked, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I wanted to say I won't be sitting at home," I said calmly. "I'm going to Sister Althea's place. Her sciatica is acting up. She asked for help. I'll be back in a week, just when you return." Kenyatta leaned out of the car window, already wearing dark sunglasses. "Althea? Perfect!" she threw out, not even hiding her joy. "Less electricity wasted. Leave the keys with the neighbor. All right, we're leaving. Tavorius, get in already." They didn't even hug me. Tavorius waved a hand, jumped behind the wheel, and the car peeled out toward the gate, tires screeching. I watched them go until the red taillights disappeared around the bend. "Safe travels," I whispered into the void. Exactly 30 minutes later, a black stretch sedan pulled up to my gate, gravel crunching softly. A chauffeur in a cap stepped out, opened the door for me, and bowed his head respectfully. "Mrs. St. James, we are ready. Captain Thaddeus is expecting you." I slid onto the soft leather of the back seat. The gray raincoat fell to the floor. I put on dark sunglasses, adjusted the silk scarf at my neck, and looked into the rearview mirror. Staring back was not a pensioner who could be tricked and abandoned. Staring back was the boss. The drive to the port in New Orleans took an hour. We moved fast, confidently, ignoring traffic thanks to the special pass on the windshield. When we pulled up to the river terminal, I saw exactly what I expected. The boarding line was massive. People were shoving, children were crying, someone was arguing with security. Heat, humidity, the smell of exhaust fumes. My driver didn't get in the general line. The car smoothly bypassed the crowd and headed toward a closed gate marked "Service Entrance, Authorized Personnel Only." The guard, seeing the license plate, instantly hit a button, and the barrier flew up. We drove right onto the wharf, where asphalt turned to concrete, right up to the gangway. I saw them about 50 yards away, behind a chain-link fence separating the VIP zone from the general mass. Tavorius, sweating profusely, was dragging 2 massive suitcases, trying to push through to the check-in counter. Kenyatta stood nearby, waving her hands and yelling at a porter who seemed to be ignoring her hysterics. They looked pathetic in their pretense of luxury, paid for with stolen money. The driver opened the door. I stepped onto the concrete pier. The wind from the Mississippi hit my face, humid, heavy, smelling of freedom and river silt. 2 young crew members in impeccable white uniforms immediately ran up to me. "Madam St. James?" one of them said, scooping up my small bag as if it were a royal relic. "Welcome aboard. The captain has ordered your luggage to be taken to the owner's suite immediately. Please, follow us." I adjusted my glasses, and without looking back at the fence where my son and daughter-in-law were fighting for a place in the sun, I stepped onto the gangway. They were too busy with their petty scandal to notice how the shadow of my limousine fell over their dreams. I entered the owner's suite, and the door closed silently behind me, cutting off the noise of the port. Perfect silence reigned here, broken only by the barely audible hum of the air conditioning. The space was immense. A living room with panoramic windows, a bedroom finished in mahogany, and a private exit to a secluded section of the deck. But I wasn't interested in the interiors I had approved from catalogs 10 years ago. I was interested in the large wall-mounted monitor connected to the internal security system. I pressed a button on the remote. The screen flared to life, splitting into several sectors. The camera in the deck. A corridor showed exactly what I was waiting for. Tavorius and Kenyatta were walking down the carpeted hallway, looking around like kids in a candy store. Tavorius dragged the bags, puffing but smiling, while Kenyatta floated ahead, running her fingers along the polished handrails. They stopped at the door of stateroom 404, the diamond suite, the very one I had paid for, thinking I was saving the roof of our home. They went inside. I switched the camera to the interior view. Yes, the suites had discrete cameras in the corners of the ceiling for guest safety and dispute resolution. The audio was crystal clear. "Lord have mercy, Tavorius!" Kenyatta squealed, tossing her purse onto the massive bed covered in snow-white linens. "Look at this balcony! Look at this bathroom!" She twirled around the room. Her fuchsia dress was a bright blur against the cream walls. Tavorius, wiping his sweat, flopped into an armchair and spread out in a satisfied grin. "Well, was it worth it?" he asked, looking at his wife with adoration. "You better believe it." Kenyatta ran to the table where a welcome bottle of champagne waited in an ice bucket. "Open it quick. We need to celebrate the start of our freedom." The pop of the cork sounded dry, like a gunshot, through the speakers in my cabin. Tavorius poured the sparkling wine into tall flutes. Foam spilled over the edge, dripping onto the carpet, but they didn't care. "To us," Kenyatta proclaimed, raising her glass. "And to finally breaking out of that crypt." They clinked glasses. Tavorius took a big gulp and chuckled. "Listen, I felt a little awkward when we left. Mama was just standing there with that old grocery bag." Kenyatta snorted, her face twisting into a scornful grimace. She set her glass down and hunched over, shuffling her feet, mimicking a shaky walk. Her voice changed, becoming scratchy and pitiful. A caricature of my voice, though I never spoke that way. "Oh, children, you go on. I'll stay here with the cats, guard the house, save a penny," she mumbled, and they both exploded with laughter. "Oh, I can't. She's so naive, Tavorius. No money." She swallowed it and didn't even choke. "The old heifer believes anything we say, as long as we don't bother her." "She's probably sitting there right now, drinking her empty tea and thinking, 'Poor us,'" Tavorius added, pouring himself more. "Well, it's fine. Let her guard. Fresh air is good for her, and we are royalty." I stared at the screen without blinking. In my hand was a cup of hot coffee, and it wasn't trembling. I felt no pain, only disgust, as if watching roaches that had gotten into the sugar bowl. They felt untouchable. They thought the world belonged to them. "All right, enough about sad things." Kenyatta downed her champagne in one gulp. "Let's go. I want to see the restaurant. They say the chef is from France, and we need to put the staff in their place immediately. Otherwise, they like to slack off with tourists." They left the cabin, slamming the door. I saw in the hallway how Kenyatta snapped her fingers under the nose of a passing maid, demanding she move her cart out of the way. I picked up the internal phone and dialed a short number. "Captain?" I said. "Yes, Madam St. James." Emmerich's voice was crisp, military. "The guests from 404 have left the cabin. Initiate Phase 2. Pack their things neatly, but without extra reverence, and block their key cards." "It will be done. The keys for the new assignment are ready." I leaned back in my chair. The show was starting. An hour passed. The sun began to dip toward sunset, painting the Mississippi waters in gold. The gilded magnolia blew its horn and smoothly departed from the wharf. Tavorius and Kenyatta were, judging by the cameras, terrorizing a bartender on the middle deck, demanding he remake cocktails that, in their opinion, had too much ice. When they returned, flushed and pleased with themselves, to the doors of their suite to dress for dinner, I turned the sound back on. Tavorius casually tapped his card against the lock. The indicator blinked red. He frowned, wiped the card on his blazer sleeve, and tapped it again. Red. "What are you digging around for?" Kenyatta asked impatiently. "I need to use the bathroom." "Yeah, it demagnetized or something," Tavorius grumbled, starting to get nervous. He jerked the handle. The door was locked tight. At that moment, a senior steward, a young man with perfect posture and a stone face, appeared from around the corner as if by accident. "Problems, folks?" "Your stupid card isn't working," Kenyatta barked. "Open the door for us immediately. Our things are in there." The steward smiled politely, but his eyes remained cold. He pulled out a tablet, checked the data, and shook his head. "I apologize, Mrs. St. James. There was an administrative error during booking. You see, this suite is reserved under a priority shareholder list. An asset reallocation occurred." "What?" Tavorius's eyes bugged out. "What assets? We paid $15,000. This is our cabin." "Unfortunately, the system annulled your stay in this category," the steward continued unflappably. "Your belongings have already been transferred to a stateroom corresponding to your current status of confirmed loyalty." He handed Tavorius 2 ordinary mechanical keys with heavy brass tags. Stamped on them was the number 012. "Where is that?" Kenyatta asked suspiciously, not taking the key. "Lower deck, ma'am. Stern sector. Next to the engineering block." "Are you kidding?" she screeched so loud the echo bounced down the corridor. "In the bilge? You want to shove us in the bilge? I will complain. Where is the manager? Where is the captain?" "The administration office is located on the sun deck in the VIP zone," the steward replied calmly, pointing to the stairs. "But I'm afraid the decision is final." Kenyatta snatched the keys from the steward's hand and threw them at Tavorius. "Let's go," she hissed, grabbing her husband by the elbow. "We are going to tear this 2-bit operation apart. I will sue them. They will be crawling on their knees." They spun around and, stomping like elephants, ran toward the stairs leading to the upper deck, where, sitting in a soft armchair, enjoying the sunset and the silence, I was waiting for them. I adjusted my glasses, opened a volume of French poetry, and took a sip of espresso. Steps on the stairs grew louder. Rage was approaching to crash against the cliffs of my reality. The door to the VIP sun deck flew open with such force it sounded like it was breached by a battering ram. The slam of metal against the magnetic stop made the gulls lazily circling the stern scatter in fear. I didn't even flinch, just carefully turned a page, enjoying the rustle of thick paper, and brought the porcelain cup to my lips. "Where is this damn manager?" Kenyatta's shrill voice sliced through the river air, destroying the harmony of wind and waves. "I demand someone come out here immediately. We paid money," Tavorius echoed, out of breath from the run. "You have no right to put us in a doghouse." They burst onto the deck, ready to smash and break. Their eyes feverishly searched for a victim, someone in a uniform to vomit their poison onto. But the deck was empty. Only me, sitting at the center table under a canvas awning, and a waiter frozen at a respectful distance with a silver coffee pot. They froze. At first, they only saw a silhouette. A woman in an impeccable white linen suit, a wide-brimmed hat, and huge dark glasses hiding half her face. A woman radiating peace and that specific lazy confidence that only comes from very old money. Kenyatta took a step forward, opening her mouth to keep screaming, but the words stuck in her throat. She squinted. I slowly removed my glasses and looked at them. The silence hanging over the deck was louder than any scream. Mama? Tavorius exhaled. His face stretched, his jaw dropped, making him look like a foolish fish thrown onto the bank. Kenyatta paled, then turned red, spots of anger blooming on her neck. "You?" she shrieked, and in that sound there was as much disbelief as rage. "What are you doing here?" I neatly placed the glasses on the table next to the book and checked my watch. "Drinking coffee, Kenyatta, and enjoying the view, until you came and ruined it with your shouting." Tavorius stepped toward me, clenching his fists. His fear shifted to aggression, the defensive reaction of a weak man backed into a corner by his own delusions. "Are you stalking us?" he yelled, spitting slightly. "Have you completely lost your mind, old woman? Get out of here, you crazy stalker. How did you even get here? On whose dime?" "It's our money." The realization hit Kenyatta. She flew to the table. Her eyes burned with a fanatical gleam. "You stole our money. You didn't pay for the repair. You bought a ticket to ruin our vacation." "It was my money, Kenyatta," I replied calmly, not raising my voice. "The money I saved for years, which you two stole from me under the guise of rotten beams." "You witch!" Kenyatta lost the remnants of her self-control. She lunged across the table, trying to grab me by the lapel of my jacket to shake me out of the chair. "Get out of here! Security! Throw this pauper out!" Her fingers with long, sharp nails almost touched the fabric of my suit when a voice, like a ship's horn, shook the air. "Remove your hands!" It wasn't a shout. It was a command given in a tone that allowed no second of delay. Kenyatta recoiled as if shocked by electricity. Tavorius tucked his head into his shoulders. From the doors of the bridge, Captain Emmerich Thaddeus emerged. In his dress uniform, with gold stripes on the sleeves and a peaked cap, he looked like a cliff face. Behind him stood two burly security officers. Thaddeus walked past the frozen Tavorius without even looking at him and stood between me and Kenyatta. His shadow covered my daughter-in-law completely. "Remove your hands from the owner of this vessel," he rumbled, looking down at Kenyatta with undisguised contempt. Tavorius blinked, trying to digest what he heard. "Owner?" he repeated, his voice cracking. He giggled nervously, pointing a finger at me. "Captain, you're mistaken. This is my mother. She's a pensioner. She lives in a guest cottage. She only has money for sweet tea." Thaddeus slowly turned his head to Tavorius. There was ice in his gaze. "Mr. St. James," he pronounced in a frosty tone, "allow me to enlighten you. Madame Ophelia St. James is the holder of the controlling interest in Riverflow Holdings. She owns this shipping company, that port back there, and this riverboat, from keel to stack." Tavorius swayed. He looked at me, then at the captain, then back at me. In his eyes, a world was collapsing. The world where he was smart and cunning, and I was old and foolish. "That can't be," Kenyatta whispered, grabbing the back of an empty chair to stay upright. "She has nothing. She gave everything to us." "Technically," Thaddeus continued, ruthlessly finishing them off, "you are currently not at a resort. You are in Madame Ophelia's living room, and judging by your behavior, you are uninvited guests who have also committed an act of aggression and trespassing in a private zone." I watched as the meaning of his words sank in. Not just the wealth, but the fact that they had stolen 15,000 from a person who controlled millions. They stole loose change from a dragon they thought was a lizard. "Mama!" Tavorius wheezed. His legs gave out. He didn't sit. He collapsed. His knees hit the teak decking with a dull thud. Kenyatta slumped next to him. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish, but no sound came out. Their arrogance, their superiority, it all evaporated, leaving only animal terror before the woman who continued to calmly stir her coffee with a little spoon. "Emmerich," I said quietly, not looking at the cowering couple. "The coffee is getting cold. Sit down. We need to discuss the route." "Take them out of my sight," I threw out quietly, returning to my cup. Security lifted them by their arms like sandbags. Tavorius was still mumbling something. His feet dragged along the deck, while Kenyatta, conversely, had gone numb, turning into a statue of horror and bewilderment. They weren't kicked off the ship. Not yet. Emmerich knew my intentions without words. For them, a special torture was prepared, uncertainty in a confined space. They were taken to cabin 012. I knew that cabin. It was directly above the propeller shaft. There were no portholes, and the vibration from the engine was such that a glass of water on the nightstand constantly walked across the surface. The perfect place for reflection. All day, I didn't make a sound. I let them stew in their own juices, in fear and conjecture. I imagined Kenyatta pacing from wall to wall in that tight box, hissing at Tavorius, trying to come up with an excuse. "It was a loan. We just borrowed it. We would have paid it back. She's a mother. She'll forgive. Surely, she kept repeating. They hoped that my maternal heart, which they had trampled for so many years, would show weakness again. By 8:00 p.m., I sent a steward to them. He delivered an envelope of thick cream paper with gold embossing, an invitation to dinner, private dining room, the Romanoff. 8:30 p.m. I arrived early. The room was small, intimate, designed for high-level business negotiations. Walls paneled in oak, dim sconce lighting, heavy velvet drapes the color of dark emerald. I sat at the head of the table. Before me was a dish of baked trout and a glass of dry Riesling. Exactly at 8:30, the doors opened. They walked in hesitantly. Kenyatta had managed to change into a black cocktail dress. Apparently, she decided a mournful look would score pity points. Tavorius was in the same blazer, crumpled and pathetic. They looked like schoolchildren called to the principal's office, but hope still flickered in their eyes. Hope that I had played boss, and now we would make up. "Mama," Tavorius began, taking a cautious step toward the table. "We are so glad that we can talk calmly. Sit." I pointed to the 2 chairs opposite me. They sat. Kenyatta immediately pasted a smile on her face, though the corners of her lips trembled. "Mother Ophelia," she cooed, nervously tearing at a napkin. "What a terrible misunderstanding today. We were so shocked. You understand, nerves, this renovation. We just wanted what was best. We just didn't want to worry you with our problems." I continued silently cutting a piece of fish. The clink of silverware against porcelain was the only sound in the room. They waited for menus, waited for waiters, waited for wine, but the table before them was empty. No forks, no glasses, only polished wood and a thick gray cardboard folder lying in the center. "Where is—" Tavorius looked around in confusion. "You will not be served dinner." I put down my fork, dabbed my lips with a napkin, and looked at my son. There was no warmth in that look, only fatigue. "Have you eaten, Tavorius? You've been eating at my expense for the last 5 years. I think you're full to the throat." "What are you talking about?" He tried to feign misunderstanding, but his eyes darted to the folder. I reached out and slowly, with a quiet scrape, pushed the folder toward them across the table. "Open it." Tavorius flipped the cover with trembling fingers. Kenyatta craned her neck, peering at the papers. The first page was a spreadsheet. Numbers, columns, dates, red marker notes. "That is not a cruise bill," I said, taking a sip of wine. "That is a forensic accounting audit. A full audit of my personal accounts and the accounts I gave you access to via power of attorney." Tavorius paled until he blended with the tablecloth. Kenyatta swallowed convulsively. "Did you think I didn't notice?" My voice was quiet, but every word fell like a stone. "Receipt for hypertension medication, $400, but withdrawn from the card, $1,500. Mama, prices went up, the pharmacy is expensive." But in reality, the difference went to Kenyatta's manicures. I turned the page in my memory, knowing the document by heart. "Groceries. You brought me a bag of grits and milk, but wrote off $1,000 a week as helping Mama. You even paid for gas for your SUV with my pension card." "Tavorius, it's a mistake," my son wheezed, but didn't dare raise his eyes. "And now the roof repair," I continued ruthlessly. $15,000, the climax of your greed. You didn't just steal that money. You stole it while looking me in the eye and telling fairy tales about rotten beams. You stole it knowing it was my last savings for a rainy day." "Ophelia, listen!" Kenyatta shrieked, realizing the earth was sliding from under her feet. "It was a loan! We wanted to return it! Tavorius is having trouble at work. We just—" "Enough!" I slammed my palm on the table. The sound was sharp and short. They flinched. "I wasn't senile, Tavorius," I said very softly, and that softness terrified them more than screaming. "I was patient. I hoped your conscience would wake up, that you would remember who bought you that house you live in, who paid for your education. I waited for you to be satisfied, but you are insatiable." I closed my eyes for a second, saying goodbye to the illusion of family I had tried to preserve. My patience ended yesterday when I found that invoice in the trash can. I nodded at the folder. Check the last page. Bank notification. An hour ago, I revoked all powers of attorney. Your cards linked to my accounts are blocked. Joint accounts are frozen pending the investigation into embezzlement. Embezzlement? Tavorius looked up at me, eyes full of horror. Mama, you're pressing charges? Your personal cards are currently overdrawn, I continued, ignoring his question. Credit limits annulled by my order as the owner of the partner bank. You don't have a dime, not even for a bottle of water. Kenyatta jumped up, knocking over her chair. You can't do this. We are your family. We are here in the middle of the river. How will we live? How would you live without me? I answered calmly, humbly and quietly. I pressed the button to summon the staff. Dinner is concluded. You are dismissed. Go to your cabin. You need to sleep. Tomorrow will be a hard day for you. The doors opened, and the figure of the head of security appeared in the frame. Tavorius and Kenyatta, hunching over, dragged themselves to the exit, clutching the folder of evidence of their shame to their chests. They walked into the darkness of the lower decks, and I remained in the light of the lamps, alone, with cold fish and the bitter taste of victory, which tasted like ash. The morning of the next day met me with thick, milky fog rolling over the water. I sat in the solarium on the upper deck, a glass-enclosed veranda where palms and orchids grew, creating the illusion of a tropical paradise in the middle of the American autumn. In my hands was a cup of herbal tea, and a plaid blanket lay on my knees. It was quiet here, but the silence was deceptive. I knew that several decks below, in the cramped cabin 012, where the screw vibration rattled bones, a storm was raging. Security reported that the screaming started in the night. Rats backed into a corner always start biting each other, stripped of money, status, and most importantly, the illusion of impunity. Tavorius and Kenyatta predictably began looking for someone to blame. And of course, each saw the other as the culprit. The door to the solarium creaked softly. I didn't turn around, continuing to watch the prow of the riverboat slice through the gray sheet of water. Mother Ophelia. The voice was quiet, trembling, soaked with tears. I slowly placed the cup on the saucer. The clink of china sounded unnaturally loud. Turning my head, I saw Kenyatta. She looked different. The haughty posture was gone. The predatory glint in her eyes vanished. She wore a simple black dress. Her hair was messily gathered in a bun, and her face was untouched by makeup, which only highlighted her red, swollen eyes. She stood at the entrance, nervously wringing her hands like a schoolgirl coming to confess to breaking a window. "May I?" she whispered. I gestured to the wicker chair opposite. "Sit, Kenyatta." She walked over and sat on the very edge, hunching over, trying to appear smaller. "I couldn't sleep," she began, and a single tear rolled down her cheek. "Tavorius, he went off the rails. He was screaming, blaming me for everything." She sobbed, covering her face with her palms. I watched this performance with detached curiosity, like a theater-goer who knows the plot by heart. "Ophelia, you have to listen to me." Kenyatta took her hands from her face and looked at me pleadingly. "I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know the scale. Tavorius always said it was his money, that it was bonuses, deals that went well. I believed him. He's the man, the provider. How was I supposed to know that he was stealing from his own mother?" She leaned forward, trying to catch my eye. "I'm a victim too, you understand. He used me. He forced me to live high on the hog to maintain his image. Buy this, wear that, we have to fit in. I just wanted to be a good wife, and now you think I'm a monster." Her voice broke into a whisper. "I love you, Mama. I always wanted us to be a real family. But Tavorius, he turned me against you. He said nasty things. He walled us off. He came up with the roof story. I told him, we can't take Mama's last dime. And he laughed and said you wouldn't understand anyway." I silently picked up the teapot and poured her a cup. Steam rose up, smelling of herbs and lies. "Drink," I said evenly. Your throat is dry from so many words." Kenyatta grabbed the cup with both hands, like a drowning woman grabbing a straw. "Thank you. You are a saint, Ophelia. I don't deserve your kindness. I just want you to know I'm leaving him. As soon as we get back, I'm filing for divorce. I can't live with a thief and a liar. I'll work. I'll pay back every penny. Just please don't throw me out of your life. Give me a chance to make amends." She looked at me with clear, devoted eyes. If I hadn't known her for 10 years, I might have believed it. Her acting was flawless. The perfect victim of a tyrant husband, seeing the light and repenting. I took a sip of my tea, feeling the warmth spread inside. "You are very convincing, Kenyatta," I said thoughtfully. "Almost talented. Tavorius really is weak. He's a follower, clay in someone else's hands." Kenyatta's face brightened. She decided the hook was swallowed. "Yes, exactly, he's weak, and I just fell under his influence, but there is one detail." I put the cup on the table and picked up the tablet lying next to a bowl of cookies. "This vessel has very modern security systems, especially in the lower compartments where the engine rooms and crew quarters are, where you are currently living." Kenyatta froze. The smile of hope began to slowly slide off her face, exposing fear. "Due to engine noise and insurance requirements," I continued in a lecturing tone, swiping my finger across the screen, "audio recording runs 24/7 in those cabins, in case of emergencies or passenger conflicts." I pressed a file icon. The silence of the winter garden was torn by a sharp, hysterical voice, Kenyatta's voice, but not the one sitting in front of me now, the real one. The recording was made late last night. "You idiot, Tavorius, you spineless jellyfish! You couldn't even lie properly," thundered from the tablet speakers. Then my son's voice was heard, pitiful and defensive. "Kenyatta, keep it down. They might hear us." "I don't give a damn," Kenyatta screamed on the recording. "Let them hear. As soon as we get off on shore, I'm finding lawyers. We're declaring her incompetent. She clearly has senile dementia if she thinks she's some business tycoon. We'll dump that old cow in a state facility, the cheapest one, where they'll break her quickly. And we'll sell the house. I am not losing my money because you're afraid of Mommy." I hit pause. The last words, "old cow," hung in the air, reflecting off the glass walls of the greenhouse. Kenyatta turned white. The blood drained from her face so rapidly she looked like she was about to faint. Her mouth opened, but she couldn't make a sound. All her words about love, sacrifice, and monster Tavorius crumbled to dust in a second. I looked at her without anger, only with infinite fatigue. "Nursing home?" I asked quietly. "State-run? The cheapest one?" Kenyatta started shaking her head, backing away along with the chair. The chair legs screeched against the floor. That was emotions. I didn't mean it. You never wanted a mother-in-law, Kenyatta," I interrupted her, closing the tablet cover. "You didn't want a family. You wanted a sponsor. You only saw me as a wallet on legs that for some reason was living too long." I stood up. Kenyatta pressed herself into the chair as if expecting a blow. "Sponsorship canceled," I declared. "Go to your husband. Enjoy each other's company. You don't have much time left until arrival." I turned and walked to the window, making it clear the audience was over. Behind my back, I heard heavy breathing, a sob, and then hurried, shuffling steps of a person fleeing. Outside the glass, golden forests floated by, but I only saw the reflection of my own face, stern, calm, and finally, free. No more than an hour after the conversation in the solarium, the silence of my private library was broken by the noise of a struggle and heavy breathing. I was sitting in a deep leather armchair, reviewing cargo reports for the last quarter, when the doors flew open, nearly flying off their hinges. A strange procession appeared in the doorway. In front, literally dragging a man in a white coat by the sleeve, rushed Kenyatta. Her face, recently tear-stained and pitiful, was now twisted in a grimace of insane determination. Behind her, stumbling and looking around wildly, scurried Tavorius. "Here, doctor! Faster!" Kenyatta shrieked, yanking the doctor so hard the poor man's coat nearly ripped. She's here. She's dangerous to herself and others." The ship's doctor, a man in his 50s with a gray beard and tired eyes, tried to free his arm, but my daughter-in-law's grip was iron. "Ma'am, calm down," he tried to appeal to her reason. "You cannot burst into the VIP zone like this." "You don't understand," Tavorius interrupted him, gasping for air. He ran toward me but stopped a few feet away, as if afraid I would bite. "She has acute psychosis. She's delirious. She claims she owns this ship." Kenyatta pointed a finger at me. Her nail with chipped polish trembled. "Look at her, sitting like a queen, shuffling papers. She has dementia, doctor. Progressive paranoia with delusions of grandeur. She stole our money, locked us in the bilge. She made up some river flow holdings. Inject her with something. A sedative, haloperidol, anything to make her stop spouting this nonsense." I slowly removed my reading glasses and placed them on top of the report. Their plan was transparent as glass and just as fragile. If they couldn't persuade me and couldn't intimidate me, one path remained: declare me incompetent. If a doctor documented acute psychosis and delirium, they, as next of kin, would get temporary guardianship. And that meant access to accounts, signature rights, control over the crazy old woman. It was their last bet, all in. "Doctor, I demand you document her condition," Kenyatta continued screaming, spitting saliva. "We need a medical report for guardianship. We have to save her assets before she gives them away in a fit of madness. She doesn't understand where she is." The doctor finally yanked his sleeve from Kenyatta's clutching fingers. He adjusted his coat, straightened the stethoscope around his neck, and took a step forward. Tavorius looked at him with hope. "Come on, doctor. Ask her. Ask her whose ship this is. You'll see for yourself." The doctor sighed heavily, took off his thin-rimmed glasses, and wiped them with a handkerchief he pulled from his pocket. Then he raised his eyes to me. Dancing in those eyes were sparks of amusement he was unsuccessfully trying to hide behind a professional mask. "Good afternoon, Madam St. James," he said in a soft, calm voice. "How is your blood pressure today?" "The morning pill helped." Ringing silence fell in the room. Kenyatta froze with her mouth open. Tavorius blinked as if slapped by an invisible hand. "Good afternoon, Dr. Beauchamp," I replied, smiling with the corners of my lips. "Thank you. Pressure is normal. 120/80. The river air works wonders. Shame some passengers make too much noise." "Dr. Beauchamp?" Tavorius stammered. You know each other?" The doctor turned to them. All his softness vanished. Now he looked at them like dirt stuck to the sole of a boot. "Young people," he pronounced in an icy tone. "I have been Ophelia's personal physician for 22 years. I managed her rehabilitation after her husband's stroke. I monitor her cardiology. I know every mole on her body and every neuron in her brain." He took a step toward Tavorius, and my son backed up, hitting the bookcase. "You claim your mother has dementia?" Dr. Beauchamp continued, steel ringing in his voice. "Strange. Her last MRI showed her cerebral vessels are in better condition than both of yours, judging by the idiocy you've staged here. Her mind is clearer than any captain on this river. But your hysteria suggests a need for a psychiatric evaluation, but for you." Kenyatta grabbed her head, sliding down the doorframe. "But we didn't know," she whispered. "How?" "You didn't know," I interrupted her, not getting up from the chair, "because you didn't care. For 20 years, Dr. Beauchamp came to our house once a month. Did you ever ask whose car was at the gate? Did you ever ask what medicine I take? No, you only saw yourselves." Dr. Beauchamp pulled a notepad from his chest pocket, quickly wrote something, tore out the sheet, and handed it to Tavorius. "What is this?" the son asked dully, looking at the paper. "That is a bill," the doctor explained graciously, "for a false emergency call of a senior specialist after hours for an unplanned consultation on mental health assessment. The patient's mental health is deemed perfect. My time, however, is expensive." Tavorius looked at the number. His face turned gray. $500, he exhaled. "We have no money. The cards are blocked." That is not my problem. Dr. Beauchamp shrugged, turning his back to them. The bill will be attached to your cabin debt. If you don't pay before arrival at the port, you'll be explaining it to the police on shore. Good day. He winked at me and walked out of the library,